Hi, today's lecture is very important. It's about porphyrias, and the theme of the video lecture is going to be we are going to look at the step that occurs, and then we are going to look at the enzyme that is involved in the step, and then the next thing is that we are going to talk about the disease that would occur if that step or that enzyme itself is deficient. All right. So the first step that occurs is succinyl CoA plus glycine to form ALA, which is aminolevulinate, right? And the enzyme involved is ALA synthase. It's as simple as that. Now, when ALA synthase is deficient, all right, or if that is the deficient enzyme, then the disease that occurs, let me put a cross here and let me write the disease, okay? The disease is going to be in red, and the disease is going to be X-linked, okay? It's going to be X-linked dominant porphyria. That's the porphyria type. Okay, so what is going to happen? You're going to have high amount of succinyl CoA and glycine in the blood, obviously. And second is that because hemoglobin synthesis is reduced, what you would also have, the symptoms that you would have, or the clinical features that anyone would have would be there will be low RBC count, okay, and low hemoglobin. Absolutely. What is going to be the symptoms that is associated with this? Obviously, this is what we will see on lab findings, that hemoglobin is low, RBCs are low. But what is the symptoms that is going to be associated with this condition? It is going to be cutaneous photosensitivity. All right. So when you think of X-linked dominant porphyria, the first step is an issue. So you want to think of photosensitivity. Okay, photosensitivity. First thing is to be photosensitive. All right, so then the second one. So the second step in this entire condition, or in porphyrias, in the synthesis of hemoglobin, is from ALA to porphobilinogen, right? From ALA to porphobilinogen. So we've got ALA. To make porphobilinogen, the ALA dehydratase enzyme, which is again a mitochondrial enzyme, is needed, right? Now, this is your second step. So, if ALA dehydratase is gone, right, the porphyria that we now have, to consider is going to be ALA dehydratase deficiency porphyria. As simple as that. It goes by the name ALA dehydratase deficiency porphyria. Absolutely. All right. So what are we going to see in the lab? Well, in the lab, because ALA dehydratase is absent, the levels of ALA are going to be high. Absolutely. And the symptoms about ALA dehydratase deficiency porphyria are going to be neurovisceral. And what do we mean by that? Well, it basically means that there's going to be a certain amount of neuropathy. All right. Plus, there's going to be abdominal pain. Okay. So whenever we're talking about porphyrias in general, I want you to think of porphyrias of two types. Okay. Especially when talking about clinical features. One, to be cutaneous, that means having any photosensitivity, and second is to understand to have any neurovisceral conditions, right? So that is what I want you to understand. Okay, so this is a neurovisceral porphyria. Which one? The ALA dehydratase porphyria. Okay, so we've got two porphyrias out, right? Now let's go to the third step. Okay, let's go to the third step. So the third step here is that there's porphobilinogen, right? There's porphobilinogen. Now porphobilinogen has to be converted into something called as uroporphyrinogen. right? Obviously, there's an intermediary in the middle, but we do not want to remember the name. It's not important. So there are two enzymes involved in bringing porphobilinogen to uroporphyrinogen, specifically uroporphyrinogen 3. Now, the first enzyme that is involved is your uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase. Okay, interesting. And the second enzyme that is involved is uroporphyrinogen 3 cosynthase. So let's call the second enzyme as uros. Okay. Now, the first enzyme, which is uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase, if that is deficient, then the disease that is produced is called acute intermittent porphyria. It's called acute intermittent porphyria. Okay, so which everyone is familiar with, it's called AIP, acute intermittent porphyria. So what is going to be elevated in AIP? Obviously, porphobilinogen is going to be elevated. There's going to be increased level of ALA because the previous step is ALA, right? So there's going to be high ALA, as we can see here, and there's going to be high porphobilinogen. So increase ALA, increase porphobilinogen, PBG. Sounds perfect. And what is going to be the symptoms? It's going to be neurovisceral symptoms. It's going to be neurovisceral symptoms, right? Now, the other thing is that it is associated classically with urine discoloration. That means that the urine gets darkened when exposed to light. It is sometimes considered as a curse of a witch. In the olden eras, it was considered because it was always manifested after puberty, right? So it was considered to be a curse. And there's a certain amount of neuropsychiatric disturbances which makes the patient a little having any psychiatric issues, and you're probably considering that, right? However, there is no cutaneous photosensitivity. Okay, there is no cutaneous photosensitivity. So you will have abdominal pain, you'll have neuropathies, psychiatric conditions, even tachycardia. I'm sorry, because of space constraints, I need to get most of it completed here, right? So that is acute intermittent porphyria. Now, if there is a deficiency of the enzyme uros, which is the same enzyme that is helping convert porphobilinogen to uroporphyrinogen, so there's going to be a different condition, right? And that condition is going to be called as congenital erythropoietic porphyria. It is going to be called as congenital erythropoietic porphyria, CEP. Okay. Now, congenital erythropoietic porphyria, what should we know about that condition? One, that uros is the one which is deficient. Second, because it is congenital erythropoietic porphyria, what are we expecting? Well, I would want you to remember C for congenital and C for cutaneous. So what we will have is that we'll have cutaneous conditions like photosensitivity, erythema, swelling, okay, blisters, right? The E I want you to understand is erythropoietic. right? Erythropoietic means RBCs. RBCs, if there's an issue with RBCs, I want you to think of hemolytic anemia. Hemolytic anemia. Also, because there is hemolytic anemia, you should consider splenomegaly. So, if anyone asks that what is congenital erythropoietic porphyria, it is a rare condition where there is hemolysis, there is photosensitivity, there is a splenomegaly. If someone asks what's acute intermittent porphyria, well, again, you should know the condition, you should know the enzymes, and you should know what happens to the urine. If someone is asking what is deficiency, ALA-D dehydratase deficiency porphyria, then you should know about that as well. Okay, so we have completed up to step number 3. Okay, now for the other steps, let's have a look. Okay, now the next step that we have here is step 4, which is uroporphyrinogen 3 to corpoporphyrinogen 3. Okay, let me just get this off so that we can read it, right? Is corpoporphyrinogen 3 here? Absolutely. For that, we need an enzyme called as uroporphyrinogen decarboxylase, which is also called as UROD. Okay, we had UROS, now we're looking at UROD. Now, if this step has an issue, again, it's in the cytosol. If this step has an issue, we are looking at a condition called as UROD deficiency. Okay, but the condition is called as Porphyria cutanea tada, PCT. Okay, so what we're going to have is that we are going to have on lab values, we'll have increased uroporphyrinogen. Obviously, there's going to be an increase in the uroporphyrinogen because this UROD enzyme is not there. It's as simple as that. Increase in uroporphyrinogen. Increase uroporphyrinogen, UP. Okay. Now in Porphyria cutanea tada, because the name suggests Porphyria cutanea, cutanea means cutaneous, and there's only cutaneous symptoms. I want you to realize that there's going to be vesicles plus bullae plus photosensitivity. Okay, so that is another important thing that we have to remember. So PCT done. Now the next 3 diseases that we have, the last 3, okay, are again in the mitochondria. Let's have a look. Right, the first that we have is corpoporphyrinogen 2 protoporphyrinogen, and that involves this enzyme called as CPOX, corpoporphyrinogen oxidase. That is your 5th step. They've written it as 4th here, but let's consider it as the 5th step because we are going disease wise, right? So CPOX, if there is a deficiency in CPOX, the condition that is then it leads to, right, deficiency of CPOX then leads to hereditary porphyria. Correct? Now hereditary porphyria has going to be is associated with increase in corpoporphyrinogen 3. Obviously, as here, one step before, simple, right? But what are we expecting this patient to have? Now that is something interesting here. The patient will have both conditions. The patient will have cutaneous conditions and also neurovisceral conditions. So the patient will come with complaints of photosensitivity, but the patient will also come with neurological conditions. neurological complications, developmental delays. Interesting. The next condition is going to be the one associated with this step, right? Protoporphyrin oxidase. Now that the disease here is going to lead to a condition called as, and I'm going to change the color so that we can figure out, right, is going to be variegate porphyria, right? It's going to be variegate porphyria. Now, variegate porphyria and hereditary porphyria are quite similar. Both of them have the combination of these two conditions. That means it has the cutaneous features and the neurovascular features and neurovisceral features. So, how would you differentiate the two? Well, the only way you could differentiate the two is that you have to look for increased in protoporphyrinogen 9 for variegate porphyria. Okay, that is the only way you can look for, right, to differentiate. I mean, obviously you could just do an enzyme assay, but this is another way of figuring out what could be the problem, right? Now that being done, we come to the last disease that we have, which is going to be the one that is associated with phyrochelatase deficiency, right? That is your step 7, and your 7th disease where there's going to be ferrochelatase deficiency is going to be nothing but erythropoietic porphyria, right, or protoporphyria. Last disease is starting with the same disease, is coming back to the same mitochondrial now, and here it's only going to be cutaneous. As you can remember, the first that we started here, the X-linked dominant porphyria, was also only cutaneous photosensitivity. Here again, we just have photosensitivity. The only thing is that it is non-blistering. All the other ones were blistering. This one is non-blistering protoporphyria, erythropoietic porphyria. And having said that, we have now amazingly covered all the conditions that are associated with these enzymes and its deficiency. Thank you. See you later.